Chief Justice Shah, Justice Ravindra Bhatt, Professor Adrian Evans, Geraldine Clark, Mr. Lalit Bhasin, Dr. Madhav Menon, our distinguished colleague and guest from Bangladesh, Dr. Kamal Hussain, Elizabeth, and friends. Today has been a very intense and rewarding day when we were able to look at the different facets of the legal profession, and we explored the foundations of the profession. Professor Adrian Evans spoke about the need for ethical guidelines, their importance, and then spoke about ethical consciousness, which is so vital for the success of the legal profession. I was in Australia in June as the head of a delegation, and I had gone to various universities. Monash was one of them, where I met Professor Evans. I looked at the curriculum, and I was deeply impressed by the fact that 1/3 of the space is actually dedicated to ethics and the application of ethics in the legal profession. I think one important lesson which we have to learn from today's deliberations is that ethics is not a subject of 10 commandments which have to be simply memorized, but it is a choice of values which is going to constantly appear before the legal practitioner every moment of his life. It's a moment of choice, it's a moment of reckoning, and it requires a great deal of courage. There was a very interesting question from one of the members of the audience, that what happens if I choose neither to be moral nor immoral, but amoral? Can't I still perform the functions as a legal practitioner? The question is, from the realm of moral philosophy, a very pertinent question. From the perspective of existentialism, a still more relevant question. And in terms of purely pragmatic cynicism, which overtakes the best of us every morning, it's a very vital question. I watched very carefully what Professor Evans would say, and I saw that he paused for a moment and gently said into the mic, "I don't think that will do. You have to be moral." He said it very gently, but I could see the kind of ratiocination which had gone behind that very carefully structured answer. It is fashionable in our world not to take positions, and it is still more fashionable to leave moral dilemmas open. And nothing is easier than simply shirking the responsibility to take a decision or a call on any subject, including the decision for and on behalf of the client. The one thing which we learned today, both from Adrian Evans as well as Geraldine Clark, is if this profession is going to have credibility in its regulatory mechanism. It can do that only if the profession shows itself up as a transparent, accountable, serious-minded, responsible, and a functional body, capable of weathering criticism, capable of receiving complaints against its members, dispassionately dealing with them swiftly, and collectively promising compensation. And all said and done, the success of a profession is largely dependent upon the internal self-regulation of each one of its members, but the best barometer of internal self-regulation is going to be the manifest external regulator. And does the external regulator symbolize either the dynamic moral ethos of the profession, or does it act as a pure mirror reflection of the decay which is set into the profession? And I think it's very necessary to look at Geraldine's remark that if the regulator is meant to be a reflector, you can see the health or the decay of the profession in the quality of its regulator. And I think it was a very pertinent observation. But to move towards an ethical legal profession requires abandonment. It requires sacrifice. It requires a certain inner calling, which is rational, which is irreligious, which is conscious of the fact that the independent legal profession is entirely a non-state actor, vital to the subsistence of democracy and the rule of law. All this requires a very high degree of choice, and it requires a certain degree of willingness to overlook possible, potential, material, worldly, and shall we say, mellifluous attractions of the world. This is not to suggest that lawyers are intended to live in a surreal condition, but it is deeply intended to suggest that there is a fairly high level of self-leadership which is involved in practicing law, because you act and function in different levels. You act on behalf of a person, which means you delegated a certain degree of responsibility on behalf of an individual. Your commitment is external to the rule of law and to society, which is the overriding commitment. Second is the commitment to the courts as an officer in the administration of justice. The third is the commitment to the cause of the client, and to be able to weave and marry all this into a world of competition and, shall we say, modern behavior of client capturing. It is a very, very important choice which a lawyer has to make. And what is that inner resource which is going to be able to help that lawyer to make that choice, be content with the choice, and think that that is going to lead him on to a future of greater understanding and integration with the profession? In our profession, lawyers admire success. They also admire the affluence of fellow lawyers. But how many lawyers actually admire character as a standalone trait of personality? How many admire lawyers who have actually taken up difficult positions in the public and have been willing to be pelted for it? How many lawyers have actually taken up positions for the poorest of the poor in a capital society of Delhi, where we are shortly going to have a huge event with, I'm sure, a large number of firecrackers and celebrations and festivities. We are going to have children put away in detention homes that evening, because Delhi must look neat and clean and must, not show its ugly face of poverty to all visitors. And we wouldn't know for how long those children, including disabled children, including mentally ill people, will be kept in homes. In 1980, there was one detention home just off Kingsway Camp. That's the time when both Justice Ravindra Bhatt and I, we went to college. And now, there is more than one home in Delhi. There's one in the north, there's one in the south, there's one in the east, there's one in the west. And who cares for their legal rights? Who cares for the rights of those children? Who cares for the rights of all those who are put in those detention homes? Do they have a lesser quality of Article 21? I think it's an important issue. And I'm glad that Adrian Evans, when he spoke, although he spoke like an International Bar Association member, but his voice was constantly reflective of the concerns of access to justice, which is the foundation of ethical choices which a lawyer makes. He has studied the processes of clinical legal education, and he knows that if this legal education is of any relevance upon any one of us, it requires a certain magic. It requires a certain activity. And to be able to respond to that activity, there has to be an ethical consciousness. I think it's a very, very important foundation which Adrian and Geraldine laid this morning.